I am Dr. Naomi Parry, and I'm a lecturer in humanities at the University of Tasmania in the Diploma of Family History program. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is More Than a Story, which is our family history webinar this evening. Before I introduce our speakers, I would really like to acknowledge country, that today we meet on Lutruwita, Aboriginal land, sea and waterways in what is now known as Tasmania. I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners of this land, the Muwinina people, where we meet virtually today. I am myself based in New South Wales on the land of the Darug and the Gundungurra people, but I speak from Sandy Bay. So this is the welcome, the acknowledgement to country from the Sandy Bay campus. The Muwinina people belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world. They cared for and protected country for thousands of years. They knew this land, they lived on the land, and they died on these lands, and I honour them. For the Muwinina people, the area around Nipaluna, Hobart, was their country, and they called Mount Wellington Kunani. I acknowledge that it is a privilege to stand on country and walk in the footsteps of those before us, beneath the mountain, among the gums and waterways that continue to run through the veins of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community that continues to care for country. I recognise a history of truth which acknowledges the impacts of invasion and colonisation upon Aboriginal people, resulting in the forcible removal from their lands. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. So here we are at our More Than a Story this evening, and I would like to introduce to you Dr. Tanya Evans, who is Associate Professor at Macquarie University, and Dr. Shauna Bostock. Tanya Evans is the Director of the Centre for Applied History at Macquarie, where she teaches public history and modern history. Her books include Making Histories, the prize-winning Fractured Families, Life on the Margins in Colonial New South Wales, Swimming with the Spit, 100 Years of the Spit Amateur Swimming Club, and with Pat Fane, Sinners, Scroungers, Saints, Unmarried Motherhood in Modern England and Unfortunate Objects, Lone Mothers in 18th Century London. She has published a wide range of scholarly articles and book chapters on family history, curates exhibitions, works for Who Do You Think You Are and other television production companies, and is currently undertaking collaborative work with family and local historians on an archaeological and social history project in the Blue Mountains. Tonight, she'll be talking a lot about her next book, which is Family History, Historical Consciousness and Citizenship, a new social history that will be published by Bloomsbury later this year. Dr. Shauna Bostock is a Bundjalung woman who has recently graduated from the Australian National University with a PhD in history. Her project was about her family's history, and the title of her thesis was From Colonisation to My Generation, an Aboriginal Historian's Family History Research from Past to Present. Shauna traced her 4 Aboriginal grandparents' family lines to as far back as she could go in the written historic record, which was just after the settlement of northern New South Wales. Her thesis examined her ancestors' actual lived experience throughout every era of Aboriginal history within the context of Australian history. Shauna's macro history research connects the personal, familial, political, social, governmental and national in a recovery of lives across 5 generations. Now, before we start, I just want to run through a couple of quick housekeeping things, which I probably should have done before. If you have questions tonight, please use the chat boxes in the webinar, and some of the questions will be available. We'll be answering some of them at the end. We won't be able to answer every question, there just isn't enough time, but the question session should open at about 6:45 and we'll go from there. So I'm in the tricky position of being both MC and questioner, but I would like to start with our first question to Tanya and Shauna, which is, could each of you please explain how writing family history informs your work? And maybe we'll start with Tanya.
Thanks so much, Naomi, and lovely to be speaking with you all and to be back talking with Shauna about family history. Thanks for listing my publications and my background, because that's a kind of short way of saying that I've been working as a historian of the family for a long time. I trained as a social and cultural historian in Britain, and I came to Australia in 2008 to work on a transnational history of motherhood in Britain and Australia in the 19th century. And it was when I arrived in Australia that I first learned about the passion for family history, especially amongst family historians who were descendants of convicts. And I became really interested in the ways in which historians of the family and family historians were understood as different groups of researchers, different communities of researchers. And back in 2011, I wrote an article for the History Workshop Journal where I examined some of these sort of paradoxes, and I tried to reveal some of the value of bringing together an analysis of family history and the history of the family. And really since then, I have become more and more interested in the meanings and impact of family history among family historians all over the world. And so I've been working with scholars in a variety of different countries, looking at the meanings and practices of family history all over the world. And my forthcoming book examines the practice and meanings of family history in Australia, in Canada, and in Britain. So I'm looking at family history in 2 settler colonial nations and also Britain, and looking at how family historians articulate their practice of family history and what impact undertaking family history research has on them. And for that book, I built on some of the work that I did in my book, Fractured Families, Life on the Margins in Colonial New South Wales, which was a history of Australia's oldest surviving charity, the Benevolent Society. And I worked on that in collaboration with family historians. And I wanted to build on that collaborative work because, like many public historians like myself, I'm really interested in challenging some of the hierarchies and notions of expertise and authority that are upheld within academic institutions. And I want to work with lots of different communities of researchers and scholars from all walks of life to look at how we might work on history together and what broader impact that kind of research might have. So that collaborative research has been really important to me. And I brought that into my forthcoming book. And I undertook examination of survey responses from family historians, some of whom study at the University of Tasmania. So thank you if any of you are out there for your responses, because you've been magnificent. I analysed those survey responses, and I undertook oral history interviews with family historians to understand more about their practice. So that's really what I've been doing for the last few years. You're mute, Naomi.
I just turned it back on again.
There we go. I will also tell everybody that I may have a dodgy internet connection tonight, in which case you'll see me scrambling. But Shauna and Tanya have got much better internet connections, so they will, and I know that once they get going, they will be fine without me. So Shauna, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. And wow, after Tanya spoke, I feel like a little kid in the big girl's place. I only just graduated last month, so I haven't really had a great deal of experience with webinars. So if you see me looking down a lot, I've got my little cheat sheets down here, just so that I make sure that I don't forget to say some important things. But in answer to the question about how writing family history informs your work, I would say that my entire focus has been on family history research. And so rather than saying that family history research informs my work, I would say that my experience has been the complete reverse, in that family history research is actually the foundation that informs my future work. I just thought I'd share with you a little story about when I first began my PhD on my family history research. I was really naive about what the university wanted from me, and I thought that the experiences of my ancestors and the study of their lives actually was my contribution to the scholarship of Aboriginal history. So I sort of thought that my family history research was like this great big present that I was gifting the university, and well, as if to say, well, here you go, there it is. And one of my supervisors, I think it was Peter Reed, he said to me, Shauna, you've got to place your family history research into the context of the broader Australian history. Otherwise, it's just a genealogy. So I had to learn not only what was happening on country where my ancestors lived or moved to and from on the landscape, I also had to know why they moved and fully understand the political, social, governmental, and national context of history as well. So the scope of my family history goes back to just after the settlement of northern New South Wales, and it reveals the lived experience of my ancestors throughout every era of Aboriginal history to the present day. So it begins with the encroachment of white settlers onto Bundjalung country, and it moves to Aboriginal segregation onto Australian government Aborigines reserves, and then to the control of the Aborigines Protection Board, to the exodus of Aborigines from the country to the city, and then on to the radicalisation and the fight for land rights, then to creative expression and on to the present day. So, you know, it's a biggie. So when you think about containing all that family history into a thesis and then bringing in all the peripheral history and making sure that it's situated within the context of Australian and Aboriginal history, while maintaining that forward moving momentum of a chronology, you know, I had to make really big decisions about what I could keep in the thesis and what I would have to discard to stay with the expected word count. And so my ancestors' lived experiences were my priority. So that left me feeling as though I was only able to skim the surface of many topics that I came across along the way. So the answer to the question on how writing family history informs my work, well, in a nutshell, I would say that family history didn't inform my work, it was my work. And using that as a foundation, I can build on my knowledge and branch out to find out about not just national, political and social context of history, but more importantly, find out about other Aboriginal families' experiences in places all over Australia. So that's where I'm at right now. Tanya graduated long before I did, and so I'm kind of just in this, chrysalis that sort of, you know, emerged, and now I'm starting to embark on that early career research journey. So I'm sure down the track that there's many avenues that I can follow, many branches that I can take. That will inform my history research.
I think the last point that you made, Shauna, about that it's made you look at more broadly at that sort of that broad kind of Australian history, and I think that that's something that Tanya's really finding in your research, isn't it, Tanya? That it's activating this very deep sense of history that's extraordinarily powerful and alive, and this is like the main benefit to everybody of the family histories that we all explore. Would you agree, Tanya?
Oh, absolutely, Naomi. And I think what's really interesting is that, you know, so many researchers are coming like yourself, Shauna, to think about how to contextualize their family histories within that broader context that Peter was suggesting that you do. And I think that's fantastic. And you can do that at all sorts of scales. You can do that in 1,000 words, or you can do it in a PhD thesis or a book. And I think that's why it's so exciting. And it's a wonderful development, I think, in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. Hang on, I've got my list of questions, and of course my thing's gone full screen and I can't, there we are. Computers are so vexing. And I mean, Tanya and I are both in lockdown, and I'm seeing all these little chat conversations of people saying how quiet it is where they are. And but what we are finding is that the internet is not quiet. The internet is very busy. That's what happens when you have, you know, half the country essentially all trying to get onto Netflix at the same time. So please bear
all
with
this
us.
Talk, right, as you said.
That's right. Yeah. So just another little point to make is that I did say to put questions in the chat, that's my mistake. It should have gone into the Q&A box, which is the box next to the chat box at the bottom of the screen.
All right.
And if you can't see it, make your screen a little bit bigger and it will come up. That's actually, there's various views with Zoom, but the Q&A box is where the questions will come through. So thank you. So both of you are deeply interested and invested in the emotional impact of family history. So I wonder if you could talk about that, please. So I'll start again, we'll start Tanya and then Shauna and then come back here.
Sure, thanks, Naomi. I mean, I think we should all be a bit more, talk more obviously about our emotional investments in our research for all sorts of reasons. And my interest in family history and the history of the family has really been framed by an increased scholarly interest in the histories of the emotions. And this is because family history researchers, most of whom are women working outside the academy, have often been dismissed for their supposed naivety and amateurism. And this is one of the things I didn't mention before, but one of the reasons I became so interested in family history was because I found that people could be so derisory about family historians, and I didn't understand that, and I wanted to understand that better. And I think much of that derision has been challenged in recent years, but it's still something that fascinates me. And I think that derision is often gendered. And that's why this fascinates me as a feminist researcher, because the research interests and practices of genealogists have so often been defined as unscientific, uncritical, and emotional, and therefore of little value to the academy or anyone else outside of their family or themselves. And I think it's really important that we overturn these assumptions, and myself and other researchers on family history have been working hard to do that and to show how family history is really enabling people to think historically and to produce really valuable forms of historical knowledge. And really the key argument of my book is that family history can teach everyone the joy and value of history, because it's often through our families that we first learn about history, right? And I think psychologists have become really interested in this as well, which, when scientists become interested in a subject, that must mean it's important, right? Not just historians. So I think that it's important to examine the emotional impact of undertaking family history. So when I was working on my book, I surveyed family historians about their emotional responses to undertaking family history research. So I asked them, did they feel pride, sadness, joy, anger, shame, etc., as a result of unpicking and unraveling their family history? And I write in the book about those emotional responses and reactions to undertaking family history. And as Naomi mentioned, I've written 2 books on the history of illegitimacy, of unmarried motherhood. So I've long been interested in societal attitudes towards illegitimate pregnancy. And of course, no one has a family that doesn't have an illegitimate pregnancy. So for me, in that early work, I worked on the history of unmarried motherhood to overturn people's assumptions about the so-called shame attached to illegitimacy. And again, my work is trying to overturn people's assumptions about the practice of family history. And I want to show how emotionally driven empirical research by family historians all over the world is helping to challenge the myths and assumptions about family life, both in the past, but also in the present, and to help people to redefine and reconstitute their families in the present day. There are really interesting examples of people undertaking family histories that uncover stories of adoption, illegitimacy, homosexuality, queer families in the past, that is enabling people to rethink the families that they constitute and live within in the present. And of course, I'm also completely fascinated by the huge pleasure and passion that family historians have for their research. And, at a time when many of us who teach within universities, like myself and others, are sort of battling against politicians and commentators suggesting that the arts and the humanities are not important subjects, you only have to speak with the thousands and millions of family historians all over the world to reveal how important history is to people in their everyday lives. And that's why I think it's really important that we reveal that passion to show that it's not just an emotional, uncritical practice, but to show what an important impact undertaking family history research has on people, but also on society more broadly. So that's why I'm interested in emotions and family history.
Oh, that's fabulous. I wonder why all of these politicians that love to talk about their family values don't actually value people that want to research their family and don't value that kind of level of historical knowledge. So yeah, it's something that is kind of flabbergasting, and it is. And we within the Diploma of Family History, we do have quite a lot of men, which is absolutely great. But yes, it is very tends to be something that's seen. The women are seen as the keepers and the fossickers and the ones that track the records, and so feminized history is always problematized. Yeah, Shauna, what do you think?
Well, as an Aboriginal historian researching my family's history, you won't be surprised to hear that tears have flowed upon reading some of the archival records in library repositories. And of course, that's not an exclusive to Aboriginal researchers. I think every historian at one time or another has experienced that really, you know, heartfelt empathy for people that are that they are researching. And so on my research journey, I've experienced a variety of emotions. You know, they've surfaced, and most times they come suddenly without warning, because, you know, you're quite confronted with archives that just, you know, you're reading and you're shocked sometimes. So I've experienced a mixture of emotions. Naturally, there's been lots of sadness, but I have also experienced moments of frustration and anger and shock. But on the other end of the scale, there have been times when I've experienced, you know, bursting pride and surprise and delight and elation. And so I thought it might be fun to tell you some stories about some of those moments that have generated strong emotions from me. So I've got 3 little stories about some archives, and they're only just a couple of minutes each, or a minute each, if that's okay. So my mother Rita and her sisters Auntie Ruby and Auntie Gwenny always bragged about their grandfather getting Donald Bradman out for a duck. And Auntie Ruby was a well-known Aboriginal author, Ruby Langford Ginnaby, and so she wrote about this in her first book. But I always thought that it was a bit of a family myth, and there was always a bit of doubt, and my sisters and I often wondered if Mum and the aunties were exaggerating. But while researching historic newspapers, I found...
Oh, whoops. Hang on, Shauna, yeah.
Got it. Sorry, I leaned on the pound on my laptop and I touched it, sorry. Yeah,
Oh,
so
Zoom.
where were we up to? Auntie Ruby Langford Ginnaby? Yeah, Auntie Ruby wrote about it in her book, and my sisters and I were a bit skeptical of it. When I found the newspaper article when I was researching, I was really amazed and delighted to see a typed out scorecard. And so, you know, like, this was evidence. And so now I can carry on the family tradition about bragging about my great-grandfather getting Donald Bradman out for a duck. So I've got the evidence to prove that. So that was a time in the archives when I experienced, researching, when I experienced great delight. But in my grandmother's Aborigines Protection Board file, I found information about her family endowment. Now, for those of you who don't know about the government's family endowment, there's a whole chunk missing here. I've lost a whole chunk. Oh, the typing, the printing out has gone all wrong. But anyway, look, what had happened was my grandmother was a recipient of family endowment, and Aborigines never, I'm off the cuff now, so I'm terrified I haven't got my cheat sheet. But Aborigines were who were on family endowment didn't receive it directly. It went through the Aborigines Protection Board, and so Aboriginal people had to have order cards to purchase goods at the store and clothing, etc. And then the store would send it to the Aborigines Protection Board, and they would settle their books, and then these cards would come back. So in my grandmother's Aborigines Protection Board file, I found this card, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a printout of her family endowment order card, and I can see through the dates. This is just an experience that I had. I can see through the dates that that she ordered this amount of goods, and the last entry at the end is on the 10th May 1939. And so I looked at that date and I was really quite stunned because my mother was born on the 11th of May 1939. So this archive kind of generated a really vivid mental picture of my grandmother waddling into the store with this big belly with my mum, who was born the following day, and a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and going to have the storekeeper, the white storekeeper, sign this card so that enabled her to have food and goods to feed her family. And I found that, quite confronting. And I just, it was quite stunning. And knowing the date of her last entry on this card was the day before my mother was born, it just sort of made the archives kind of jump out at me, and I visualized the whole thing, and it's just like, whoa, okay. So it was confronting to see that, and kind of generated a few feelings of, well, I don't know how to put it, and I did write it down, but I've lost that. But it generated feelings of oh wow, she had to sort of seemingly ask permission to, and get it all signed off by authorities, government authorities, before she could before she could receive these goods that were necessary to the survival of her family. And so that's how archives kind of confront you, emotionally, and also just a second. So there was this vivid picture of her, and so archives kind of take you on a roller coaster ride of emotions. In one, you're elated because your great-grandfather got Donald Bradman out for a duck. In another, you're really saddened because, your grandmother had to, give the papers to the authorities before she could receive food. And in another archive, which was written by an Aborigines Protection Board manager, he wrote to the Aborigines Protection Board in this really detailed letter about my family. And he wanted to take my great-grandmother's daughters away to be apprenticed, to be indentured as, for service. And she refused. And in the archive, I found that he wrote that she had run away with her daughters rather than have them be taken from her, and they disappeared for a while, and he had heard that they were roaming the country, last seen in Maclean, north of the reserve, and the family kind of broke up after that. And so I was just like cheering, yes, good on you, Mabel, you took the girls away, they didn't get them. And then in the same letter, at the end of the letter, this same Aborigines Protection Board manager talks about how Mabel got ill and had to go to hospital, and while she was in hospital, her youngest daughter, who was many years younger than the other ones who had grown and left home, was left with a family on another reserve, and she was ill and dying, and she got home to the reserve, and she called for the Aborigines Protection Board to get her youngest daughter sent over from the other reserve. And I have these letters of exchange between both Aborigines Protection Board managers deciding whether or not child would be sent back with her mother, Phyllis. And then when she did go back, my great-grandmother died shortly after that. So there's this really confronting emotion.
Yeah. No, there is. Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing you have to deal with. But there's been wonderful stories of really fantastic courage and solidarity, and so many wonderful things that they kind of balance on the scale of things. So
Yeah. And so would you say, I mean, I guess one of the questions that I want to ask about is, the transformative power of that kind of emotional experience, and how it changes things for you. So,
Well, it has been a wonderfully transformative journey. I mean, I've been doing this family history research for years. And so, if I look at myself at the beginning of my journey, I didn't know anything. And I kind of had this view of, a view of Aboriginal people being victims of history, and being oppressed, and while those things did happen, and in going into the history really deeply, and tracking ancestors and following them across the landscape and across and following their movements, and arriving at the end of the journey, looking back with hindsight, I really arrived at a different place. So it is transformational. And in my heart of hearts, I'm no longer, I'm not the same person that I used to be before I did this family history research journey, because all of the revelations and all of the things, the discoveries that have been accumulated along the way, from the starting point to the end point, have just kind of naturally pushed me forward into this progression where I can look back with hindsight and see that, my ancestors were courageous and heroic, and, even under some really outstandingly, unjust circumstances, they were able to survive and learn and grow and advance, and still buck the system. There was some really wonderful examples of Aboriginal people thwarting the efforts of the Aborigines Protection Board and authorities in really clever ways. And so I look on my family, my ancestors, as heroes now, and I'm proud, I'm even really proud of their heroism under such terrible circumstances. So yes, it is transformative. I'm a different person today, and I really want to show young Aboriginal people, hey, don't take on this, don't think that they were victims of history, because I tell you what, when you get into the records and you start looking at their lives, and they were so courageous and so heroic and so resilient and so different from the impression that I had when I started my history research journey. So it is transformative. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So Tanya, what would you like to say about transformative powers? Because you have this survey material, so you have a breadth that we can really tap into here. So,
look, I think a lot of the family historians that I've communicated with, not just within surveys, but over the years, have talked, like Shauna, about the agentic potential of family history research, and undertaking family history research, as Shauna has discovered, can make you much more aware of the structures of power in the past as well as the present. So it teaches individuals a lot about that with regards to class, race, gender, etc. And what I try and do in the book is to show how family historians are part of emotional communities of learners. And I've sort of come to this as somebody who's taught history within the university context for a couple of decades now. And I'm really interested at making us more aware of this huge community of lifelong learners. Obviously, you at the University of Tasmania are very aware of this lifelong community of learners, but other academics in other academic institutions are not. And I think we really have to figure out how this community of learners are operating. And it seems to me that there are this huge community of learners that operate on a familial, communal, local, national and global level. That is completely fascinating to me. The digitization of sources, the internet, Ancestry, findmypast.com are facilitating this community. But what's really, really important to how this community functions is the voluntary labor that keeps it together. So it seems to me that the community is deeply invested in acts of reciprocity. So researchers will share their data with people all over the world. They will take pictures of graveyards and cemeteries and send them to people, eighth cousins in America, to help them piece together all of their research. I think that these, and many of you will be aware of the organization called Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness, and lots of the family historians I have communicated with talk about these random acts of genealogical kindness. And I think that these acts have really important potential on an individual level, but also a societal level. And I think that these kind of global communities of learners are really transforming their own individual knowledge, like Shauna suggests, but also the knowledge of people outside of their immediate environs. And I think that gives researchers not just a better knowledge of global history or their family history, but also gives them they act within these kind of very sociable communities, so that this kind of sociability is really important as well to their lives, and that acts as researchers, and it gives them a sense of purpose. So it has a really important impact on their well-being as well. So it's transformative intellectually, but it's also transformative personally and psychologically as well. And I think that really points to some of the enormous potential of undertaking family history research for people all over the world, which is really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm seeing all this beautiful chat coming up the side with people talking about community and helping each other out while and this is what we find in the diploma, is that people are very, very willing to collaborate and to share and to I mean, Shauna, you've talked about how a large part of what you now want to do, and I know that you want to do as a private person now that you've finished your academic studies, is to help other people with their family history. And there's certainly a aching need for that within many Aboriginal communities because of those kinds of separation. So I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm just going to go to my kind of last sort of talking point, which was that how do you see family history as enhancing citizenship? And I mean, you've already talked about community building, but citizenship in particular, and I'll throw to you, Tanya, because I know so much of the new book is very much about those concepts of citizenship. So I'd really like you to elaborate on those if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, I'm very happy to. So in some ways, it's a sort of this global emotional community of learners, I think, are transforming the way that they and others think about this structured relations of power in the past, like I've talked about. But what it's enabling them to do is to act differently in the present. So a lot of them have talked about how family history research has made them much more aware of the position of women in contemporary societies, of the history of oppressed peoples. Often family history is the first time that Australian or Canadian family historians have learned about Aboriginal history, for example. So it's made them much more aware of the histories of oppressed peoples, and they have argued their research has made them much more empathetic to the conditions of people who have lived much more disadvantaged lives in themselves in the present. And so they are acting on that knowledge. And a lot of them are becoming politically engaged within their communities on a local level, but also on a global level. So I think it's had a really important transformative impact on lots of people. What it's also doing is encouraging people, like Shauna did with her research, to challenge national historical myths and storytelling about the past in Australia, Canada, and elsewhere. And it's integrating people of colour, women, the poor into those histories that they claim they weren't taught at school when they were back at school sometimes a while ago. So it's giving them kind of a profound insight into how they act as citizens today. And I think that's a brilliant thing, particularly in our contemporary world when we're so constrained in lots of ways. And I think that goes back to that point that Shauna was making about the how family history has given people agency, not just within on an individual level, but has made them much more politicized. And I think that is exciting for me anyway.
It is. It's very exciting. Yeah. I think awareness of class and the difficulty of finding out about your relatives that are more humble people is something that is galvanizing. And I saw a couple of questions that I won't address in full, but yeah, people saying, how can we find out more about women? Why do we focus on men? And it reflects the bias in our society and the fact that we tend to record what men do. But yeah, there's so much more to life, as we all know. So Shauna, what are just to kind of wrap up there, because I'll throw to questions in a couple of minutes, but what would you like to say about that? You've got relatives that you mentioned Auntie Ruby, but you've got relatives that have been at the absolute forefront of pushing Aboriginal citizenship claims. So yeah, please talk. I would love to hear about
it. Well, my mother's side, my mother's sister was Ruby Langford Ginniby, who's written 5 books about Aboriginal history and about her experiences and our family's experiences. But also on the Bostock side, on my father's side of the family, my uncles Lester and Jerry were really, at the forefront of Aboriginal activism. And so there's this kind of, I don't know, kind of a unspoken ethic. I mean, when I look at my family, my sister is in the State Library of Queensland, in the heritage section, helping Indigenous people, and I've gone into history, and so there's this kind of legacy that and a kind of general feeling in the Aboriginal community that we're here to help each other and help out everybody else along the way. And since people have become aware of my family history research, I'm getting people contacting me. I'm a member of the Bundjalung People Facebook page, and every now and then I'll put up a history post and people are interested and will private message me. And so there's this great call out there for more learning about, for more opportunities to find out about Aboriginal history. And so, you're asking what's in the pipeline for me. Well, I'm writing a book at the moment, and it's about my family history research, but it's also a way to get history, Aboriginal history, out to the general reader. It's not an academic book, it's just a narrative of my family history research journey. And in it, I put in, everything that's in my thesis, but I kind of explain Aboriginal history in one sitting, like in one story from colonisation to now, just through my family history research. And so I'm really excited to be working on that right now. And I think there's a hunger in the general audience. I just saw a comment come up saying, a lady saying we didn't learn anything about this in school. Well, I'm kind of answering that need. Aboriginal history didn't really come out until the early 1980s, and so there's a lot of people that missed out on learning the nuances of it. And there's some archives that I have found that have just come out. I mean, I've got access to, and so history is a morphing, ever-changing thing, and so I feel like we're moving, as Henry Reynolds said, into a truth-telling period, and I think a lot is coming out right now. And so I think that hunger will be answered in the near future, not just with my book, but with a lot of other work that I'm aware of coming out right now. So it's a good thing. So to those people who think that, they don't know much about Aboriginal history and they'd like to know more, hang in there, it's coming. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I've got some people that are asking where they can get copies of your work, and I know that that you can look at Shauna's work is easily available through the Australian National University Library. That's an easy download for anybody. You don't need a library card. It's perfectly available. And Tanya's
actually, I have to stop you there, Naomi. Yeah, I have to stop you there. I didn't know that it was accessible.
Oh.
And yeah. And so I actually put an embargo on it just to hold until my book comes out. So
fair enough.
So that and that's a deliberate choice of mine to have the book go to the general public, and then the academic one can come later. Academic
okay, great.
Later.
Yeah.
So the book, I hope to have the book done, by early next year. I hope
Okay,
to, because I've
fantastic.
done all the research. I'm just now putting it all together for a narrative for Alan and Unwin. So
Yep.
so yeah, it's coming.
And people have also been asking about Tanya's work, and I know that Tanya's work is generally held in all good libraries. So that's the best way to get it. Unfortunately, COVID makes that really bloody hard. But you can also, I'm not sure, I mean, a lot of academic books tend to be quite expensive, Tanya. Can you recommend any of yours that are easy to get a hold of?
Look, Fractured Families is easy and cheap, and probably it's probably e-booked most places. So that should be easily accessible. And look, if anybody wants an article of mine, I'm happy to send them a copy. And this is where I get inundated, but that's absolutely, I'm totally happy to break down those paywalls, and will do so and tell every family historian that I meet, wherever I give a talk, that I will happily send it to them. If you're not enrolled in an academic unit. And the next book will be unaffordable, unfortunately, but I think I've seen one of the respondents for surveys, but I'm happy to share bits and pieces with whoever participated in the survey. And hopefully it will be affordable sooner rather than later, but it comes out in hardback and then will become cheaper later.
Yeah, oh, thank you. So I'm going to switch this. I've got lots of questions, lots of really good questions. We're not going to get to them all, but I'll start with one from Joanna Sassoon. Hi, Joanna. Tanya, this is directed to Tanya, that she's interested in your comment about breaking down hierarchies in attitudes towards family historians, and whether you've noticed a difference in attitudes by academics towards family historians in the countries where you've researched, so the variety of countries. And have you noticed differences in the professionalisation of family history in each of those countries?
It's a really good question. And in some ways, you know, back when I first wrote about the different communities in 2011, I was spending a lot of time in archival institutions, but now I don't, and haven't done for a few years. So I'm not entirely sure. But one of the ways in which I can gauge it is that I'm involved with a great group of people called the Historians Collaborate Network. And it brings together academic historians, archivists, people who work in libraries in the GLAM sector, lots of family history organizations, mostly in Britain, where I think that derision is still pretty powerful for all sorts of reasons. You know, family history was long a practice undertaken by the aristocratic. You know, Burke's peerage was really important. Although it's kind of shifted like it has in other countries. But I do think that family history is practiced in settler colonial nations like Australia and Canada is a very different kind of practice. And it doesn't have quite that, doesn't have quite the same history as it does elsewhere. So there is a difference according to different national contexts. In terms of the professionalization, that's something that crops up in quite a bit of family history surveys as well, and responses. And they talk, I mean, I've talked about this lovely emotional, supportive, reciprocal community of learners, but people do also talk about the rivalry amongst family historians as well, especially some of the competition to get speaker slots on cruises or at conferences in order to get business, right? There's a thriving industry, and we haven't had time to talk about. One of the reasons I'm so interested in family history is that, you know, the market in family history has risen exponentially in all sorts of ways, not just in ancestry, but also in academic institutions, meeting the demands and desires of family historians as well. So that is really interesting. So family historians do talk about that, and there is no doubt that it has become increasingly professionalized. And I'm aware of many more professional genealogists in Britain than I am elsewhere. One of the interesting things that struck me when I was doing my research was how many Canadian family historians collaborate online. So there are numerous Facebook sites. I mean, Shauna's doing amazing stuff on Facebook, and of course, Aboriginal communities now do a lot of collaboration online and recognize the freedom in social media and the internet and digitization that other communities might not. And I think that's super exciting. So yes, there are definitely different communities. And look, I think it would be a great research subject. So Joanna, go research that if you want.
Okay, I've got a question from Cass Travis, who was one of our presenter in our first of the series, yes. Who is yes, she's coming for you, Shauna. She said that is it reasonable to distinguish the role of family historian and historian in the family where First Nations scholars are concerned.
Oh, thanks, Kath. You've got a real tricky one there. Say it again. Distinguish between
the role of historian of the family and family historian, as far as First Nations families are concerned. First Nations scholars are concerned.
Historian of the family and family historian.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that could be a changing role. You know, one might take up the role in the family and then it, you know, diverts to another. I'm the historian in my family, but you know, like the people who hold the really great stories are the elders, you know, and so you know, I am a historian in the family, but my family are the history kind of keepers in a way, you know, like the dad, you know, throughout my whole thesis, I'll give you my dad as an example. He would go, that's nice, you know, and he's not really interested in you know, the big long-winded explanations of all sorts of discoveries that I've made. And then one time I was like, wow, did you know that in, you know, in Redfern at the time, blackfellas were just being arrested for walking down the street? And he went, oh, don't think that didn't happen in Queensland. And then he starts to tell me all these stories about being a Queensland blackfella. And I was just like, I couldn't grab my pen quick enough and write them down, you know. So they have the lived experience. So they're kind of our treasure trove of stories. And so, you know, I kind of look at the elders and dad and everybody else as being the ones who had that lived experience. And I kind of look at myself as the historian in learning about their lived experience through archives and paperwork, you know, and oral history and talking, you know. Yeah, so the stories that they tell are just as important as formal academic research. Does that make sense? Or
yes,
am I answering her question? Yeah, because
I think so. I think I suppose, I mean, the way that I sort of, yes, I mean, I suppose it's one of the things that it strikes me as being significant with Aboriginal families in particular is that is the indivisibility of identity and history and story, that it's not that in Western culture there's a kind of a split between the sort of private life and the public life, and I feel with Aboriginal communities that split is much less, well, there isn't a split. And I think in some ways that Aboriginal people and scholars feel pressure to split themselves in this way, to become Western in their thinking. And what I think is fascinating with the work that you and Kath are doing is that you are refusing that split. And I think that's a hugely amazing thing. And when you can combine all of these, you know, heroic stories of identity and achievement and struggle, why should you split? You know, these are national stories, like your Uncle Lester got a state funeral, you know, so these are national stories. They're important. Yeah. So I've got so many awesome questions here, and I know that at 7 o'clock sharp the webinar will boot us all out. So I do want to allow a couple of minutes to kind of to wrap up and tell you about the next kind of webinar. But there's very intricate questions, specific questions here that I can't necessarily get to. But here's a kind of a future-oriented one, which is, and it's addressed particularly at Tanya, but it comes from Helen Gladman, who I know is one of our new family history enrolments. So she asks how family history research might look in the future when people can research the present day and the digital footprint that so many of us will leave. And do you think the mystery will be removed, and will it be less of a treasure hunt, or will it just be a different kind of a hunt?
I think that's a great question. And I think what's most important is that we work really hard to convince people who aren't passionate about family history about how important memorialization of family is, and the different ways in which we can tell stories about our family's past. I mean, we have our obvious archival sources, but they are shaped in particular ways, as Shauna's work reveals, and as lots of people's work reveals around, you know, the discordant histories of men and women, etc. And I think we need to get more creative. And I'm going to link this to another question as well that is really interesting about the different kind of creative ways in which we can engage with family history, because that's something that really interests me as well. And there are some fantastic examples of artists working on their family history and then producing art as a result of undertaking that research. So I really encourage all the family historians I meet to think about creative ways in which they can represent their family's past, not just by writing family trees or books, but that's brilliant, of course, but to think about different ways in which you might produce histories of your family. But the digital, goodness, who knows? I think there are actually, one interesting thing to bear in mind is that there are some new companies set up to help you digitally preserve your family histories, and to think about undertaking oral history interviews with diverse members of your family, getting people within your own family to recognize the value of that work, but then also creating an archive for the future, which would be amazing, so that people like Shauna or Victoria Haskins, who you had a few weeks ago, can then find glorious things in their attics to then write brilliant works of history.
Yes, it is ever changing. I think in some ways it's as though digitization opens up so much for us. Like, it just makes it so much easier. I mean, we can look at things that would have taken, you know, years of travel and time to get before, but then it is also closing doors as well, and in lots of ways. But I suppose that, you know, we shouldn't see them as closed doors. We should see them as places to look through differently. So I've got some really incredible questions here, and there's one in particular which there's two, and I'm just not going to get to both of them. So I'm going to pick one because it is such an interesting question, is that family for many is not totally heterosexual. Increasingly more young people are saying they're trans, their pronoun is he, she, they, them, or he or her. And so it's a question for Tanya, whether you see a place for exploring this change in our understanding of family, which is often not a biological connection. And I would extend that, Linda, whose question it is, to talk about, you know, all of the different ways that we form families. You know, there's step families and every other kind of form of family, but definitely sexuality is a strange. And we've only got, we've got about a minute and a half.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most exciting things about family history. It upends everything we understand as a traditional family. So yeah, there is some fantastic work being done by queer family historians. There's some great work. There's a sort of, have a quick Google of queer family history in the US, and there's some fantastic examples of websites set up. So yeah, I think this is one of the most exciting things about family history. And also, of course, a lot of family historians don't like their family so much. They prefer the family historians they work with who are remotely related to them. So yeah, we've got to celebrate that.
Oh, excellent. Well, I will close at this stage. I will thank both of you for being, you know, wonderful scholars and amazingly generous, you know, part of that tradition of generosity, of sharing family history knowledges. And I just would like to thank Imogen for supporting the meeting, to thank Kate, who's unable to be here tonight. But the final family history webinar for 2021 will be on the 27th of October, and it features Dr. Kira Lindsay, who is the author of A Convict's Daughter and a specialist in biography, including speculative biography, which is a aspect of writing about people when you don't quite know what they've been up to. And she'll be joined by Dr. Aoife O'Connor of the Digital Panopticon and Find My Past. So I'm sure that that's going to excite a lot of you family historians, because not only has Aoife worked on one of the large significant panopticons for convict history, but she actually works for Find My Past, which is, and she's got a fairly senior role there. So, and they will be talking about what you do and what you think when you have relatives in your past that are nefarious, whose motives, you know, so the ethics of dealing with people like that. Aoife's PhD was on criminal ancestry, and Kira is writing a speculative biography of a very dodgy person. So there's going to be, I think it's probably going to be a good way to end the year, actually, thinking about strange things. So I would just like to, again, thank you, Shauna, and thank you, Tanya. And I guess if there's anything that either of you want to say at this point, say it now.
Thank you for asking me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Lovely to chat.
All right. Well, we'll close the meeting. So thank you very much.